combat situations as you did in combat.
True.
You know, I had a half a dozen of them. I don't know why I'm here.
Tell me.
I was the world's worst pilot.
And you knew it.
Absolutely. Every time I did something wrong.
Frazer, you mentioned the Tuskegee Airmen under General Hunter and at Godman Field, Kentucky, where we moved there to Seymour, Indiana, and we were there only for a short while. And what happened is that 104 of the Tuskegee Airmen were picked up and sent back down to Godman Field, Kentucky, because they called that mutiny. And the idea of it being mutiny is because the Tuskegee Airmen were assigned to separate food facilities, separate housing, separate theater, and exchange, and all of these things, separate clubs, and it was decided that this was against the regulation by the Tuskegee Airmen. And of course, in this case, one of the Tuskegee Airmen jostled, and that's the term they used, the club manager. And of those, he was the only one who was court-martialed. And it so happened that things have changed so much. And this is why I'm so happy to be here and still be alive, too, by the way. And what has happened now over 50 years is that we have a convention the Tuskegee Airmen, each year. And I was so happy to go to Indianapolis in August, and there we had 12 black general officers. Fig Newton was the 4-star, who was the commander of the Education and Training Command down at Randolph, and we had a 3-star, and we had about 5 2-star generals, and then brigadier generals. And things have changed so much since then, it's just hard to conceive of how these things have happened. Now, it so happened that this young man was a student of mine at Howard University. I was in charge of ROTC at Tuskegee for 4 years and at Howard University for 4. And Rodney Coleman, who is the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, he was able to get the a pardoning, I would call it, to make it sound easier, of all of those who had some kind of record. They did not at the first mention Terry Roger, who was the one who had been court-martialed. And so later on, the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, he got up and he mentioned this. And of course, he was our Tuskegee Airman president of the National Association at the time. And he just dropped his head in his hands and just cried on the stage there, because he had finished law school and could not practice law because of this court-martial situation. But there are so many other things that have happened here. The last 2 Air Force commanders have been members of the Tuskegee Airmen Association. And this is the kind of recognition that we're getting now, and we're just so happy about this. Until I just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, James. What's that?
Yeah.
Okay, Bob, have you said anything, Bob? You've been sitting here real quiet. What have you?
I'm just listening.
You're a listener? Okay. Anybody? Here we are, back over B-24s. Fred Beyer.
I'd like to say a couple of words. You know, most of these guys were real young. I was 21 years old, flying a B-24 with a crew of 10.
What year were you 21?
What year? 1944.
Oh, so you're a young fella.
Yeah. So it amazes me, thinking back on it, at how high the morale was. We really didn't have a morale problem at all, and yet there were continuous efforts on the part of the Germans and others to bring down our morale. A couple of stories related to this. One was there was a lot of talk about Tokyo Rose, but they forget that we had our Axis Sally, and she had a good radio station, played all kinds of records of Harry James and Glenn Miller and Tommy Dorsey and others. And but she also threw in good little bits of information like, gee, well, all you guys are fighting the war. Your wives and girlfriends are home going out with the defense workers. And that was a real cheerful note. And in addition to that, she said, you boys from the 376th, we know where you're going tomorrow, and we are waiting for you. And we got some of that magnetic flak that you've all heard about, and we're going to use it on you for the first time. And she didn't say where we were going or elaborate on this magnetic flak, but she said, oh, and by the way, if you go down to group headquarters, Colonel Gordon's clock there on the wall is 2 minutes slow.
We got.
That shook things up a little bit. Another quick story, again on morale. The Germans had a couple of real morale busters. They were using rockets to their advantage near the end of the war for two reasons. One is they were firing rockets. They'd hang out, so you got a big formation here, maybe 500 to 1,000 airplanes. We didn't have any fighter protection because they were all over taking care of the 8th Air Force, I think. But they would lay outside and then lob these rockets, and they never hit anything, but they scared the daylights out of us. And then when we finally did get some fighters to come and help out, they had JATO assist bottles or something like that, of rockets, to give them a quick boost and run out of range of the fighters that were after them. So we got a mission assigned to us, which was the longest mission that we ever flew in 376th, to go up into an airfield in southern Germany where they had these modified craft with the rockets and the rocket assists, and they must have thought they were pretty safe up there. It was a long ways for us. It was over a 10-hour mission, and we went up there and found, much to our surprise, that they were all lined up on the runway right at we frag bombed the place and got them all. We had to fly up there at very low altitude, and I think when we finally bombed, it was around 12,000 feet. And most of us got home on about an eyedropper full of gas. So we took care of that morale problem real good.
I see. Thank you, Fred. I see Ralph Wolf, General. I was going to call you General. Ralph Wolf, you come on in the circle. Can you squeeze in somewhere, or bring up your chair all the way in the back here? And Ralph must have arrived late. So give us tell us who you are, Ralph.
I'm Ralph Wolf. I apologize for being late. I didn't hear about this somehow, and someone called me and said, look at LTV, and there I found Perry and Mario and Cy and friends, and I said, wow, I think I know some of these people. But I was a combat air crewman for the Navy, flying the Navy version of a B-24, which was called a PB-4Y2, PB-4Y1, and there was a 2. And you can pull it out of there. And I just have a couple of quick things that I thought might be of interest. During the spring of 1945, by the way, I was a nose gunner and radioman, as they call it in the Air Force. In the Navy, it's called a bow gun. But in the spring of 45, Task Force 57, commanded by Admiral Halsey, knew that there was a terrible storm and they needed some help on what to do. And I think we were the first hurricane hunters, because they came to us, a Naval Patrol Squadron, and said, we need some weather information and we don't know how to get it. We're going to ask you to fly into that storm. And they came and they asked for volunteers, and of course, we were young and didn't know any better. So we flew into that typhoon, and it was the most awesome sight I've ever seen in my life. Flying into the center, of course, tremendous turbulence going in, but we had a heavy plane, and we made it fine. In the center, the sun was shining, the sea was calm, and it was beautiful, and I had time to radio directly to Halsey's flagship the weather information we had gained going in and from the center. And we did it so well, they asked us to go back again the next day. And we said, why don't you send somebody else? They said, because now you're veterans and you know what to do. The second quick thing, Frazer, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
On the morning of August the 6th at 4 o'clock, 1945, we all reported to Combat Intelligence for briefing. We were on Tinian at that time, Perry, and we were told that all combat operations were canceled for the day, but you might want to wander down to the flight line. So we went to the flight line. We were there about 5:30. And I've never seen so much brass in all my life, nor so many MPs in Short Patrol, lining off the end of the runway as well as the flight line. But about 400 of us gathered, and we watched the Enola Gay taxi out, rev up to full power, and slowly go down the runway. That runway, as some of you who have been there may remember, was about 10,500 feet. And it went very slow, and we had watched many 29s take off before. And there was a cliff at the end of the runway about 150 feet high, and the 29 disappeared. And you can imagine what 400 flight crew members, 29s, Navy, fighter pilots, etc., were like. There wasn't a sound. Until suddenly, about 5 to 10 seconds later, this 29 rose, turned north towards Japan, and there was a cheer. And we didn't know what we were cheering for, because probably only 10 or 12 people there knew what was happening. Later that afternoon, we found out. But I was one of those 400 people who saw that. It was an incredible day. Thank you.
Hey, Ralph. Yes, sir. Harding Isaacson.
I carry a copy of my Class A pass from the 2nd Bomb Division. And I was the eldest man on the crew, being 23 years of age. I see here that my pay, including flight pay, was $93.60.
What?
Pardon?
A
month, sir.
How about that?
Mention about my almost Purple Heart. I was on leave in London and had picked up this, or she picked me up, French girl in Piccadilly, and we went to this bar on the Strand. And this was the period when the buzz bombs were coming over. And I was sitting at the end of the bar against a wall where there was a cuckoo clock. And one of the buzz bombs dislodged the cuckoo clock and clipped me in the back of the head. And I still have the scar, but no Purple Heart.
You got a buzz bomb?
Back in the fall of '44, I went down to visit my Uncle Frank. He was, this isn't an air story, but it's almost like one. And he was down at Folkestone there by Dover, up on a cliff. And they were shooting down the V-1s when they were coming over. Knocked one off, it went right in the water. And they got most of them, too.
Yes. Harry.
I was wondering whether any of the fellows in the crews who flew in Italy, flew bombers in Italy, remember anything particular about Armistice Day 1944. Do they remember going on a mission on that day? The reason I ask is because when I woke up in the morning, I wasn't scheduled to fly. But I looked out of my tent, and it seemed to be raining, sleeting, snowing, horrible conditions. I don't think the visibility was more than, 200-foot altitude. And I went back to my sack, and one of the guys who had gotten up a little earlier had breakfast with the fellows that were going out. It was supposed to be a maximum effort with 16 P-51s for each squadron. And he came back, and he said that the squadron commander had told everybody that he thought it was kind of crazy to go out in this weather. We weren't particularly trained in weather instrument flying, particularly, but just that the conditions were really abysmal. And he said he wouldn't make anybody go. If they didn't want to go, that was all right. And if he got court-martialed for doing this, so be it. So I think only four guys dropped out. The other 12 took off. One of my tent mates went into the drink about 20 minutes out. Nobody knows what went wrong with his plane. It could have been some of the crew chiefs say that the glycol might have frozen up or something like that. That was one. Coming back, there were two guys who just sort of disappeared. One of them, it was definite that one of them had trailed behind the squadron. I had done the same thing twice on my first 4 missions. I had gotten lazy or disturbed or wondering whether I'd ever get to sleep with a woman before I got killed. I mean, sex is ever present in the history of. So anyhow, I think I've gotten off the point, but my wife warned me that this would happen. All right, back to the point. We two guys. One of them was a tent mate. He was going into the drink. Two other guys. Evidently, one of them definitely trailed behind. They called him catch up. He caught up, then he drifted back. Caught up again. They called him again. The third time they looked around, he wasn't in sight. And I could swear that a half an hour after the whole rest of the bunch came back, that I heard a plane going over. It sounded like a Mustang engine, not that I got a great ear. And it just went over. And it was still miserable visibility. So if you didn't have a good squadron leader or a good flight leader leading you in and you didn't know how to navigate, you didn't know the sort of dead reckoning, he could have wound up down by the spur and hit some of those mountains down there, just that stuck out in the Adriatic east of the Foggia fields of the B-24s. And so I was wondering, we lost 3 in my squadron. That was the worst day in my time, my 9 months over there for my squadron. I went down to Foggia to the PX. I used to do that almost every week. And I heard a couple of bomber guys say, we never got to the target either. We never got to the target. The weather was so terrible. And I just wonder whether any of you guys who were in that area could confirm whether you know of any unusual losses by the bomber crews due to planes. I'm not looking to hang a rap. They said that the reason for that mission was that some psychological expert in the high command had figured out that if the Germans saw us flying on Armistice Day, it would teach the Germans that Americans were not a bunch of sentimental, democratic, well, you've heard Hitler's speeches, democratisches, blah, 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 blah. They would show that the Americans were tough and would scare the hell out of the Germans. I don't think it was great psychology on his part, but I was just interested in whether any of the bombers remember anything about November 11th, 1944. Thanks for your patience.
Nobody? Remember? Okay, well, we'll be back.
All right, well, I flew a B-25 from Sacramento, California, island hopping down to New Guinea, to Biak. They put Tokyo tanks in.
This was late then?
This was late.
Yeah, what year about?
It was in beginning of 45.
Oh, yeah.
And we 10 started out, and only 8 made it. Yeah, one crew ditched between Sacramento.
Why were you going there? What was going on?
Pardon?
Why were you taking?
We were ferrying these crafts over. And then we moved up to Okinawa and joined the group. But the night before we went, I went into town and I bought 16 bottles of 3 Feathers for $2.20. And I went out to the flight line and put it up in a gun hatch. And every place I went, they said, do you have any whiskey? And I said, how much? $5. The next place, Christmas Island, $10. Tarawa, $25. And finally, in Finchhofen, I got $50 a bottle. And I lived for almost a year on that and sent all my money home.
Okay, we got...
One pilot story always leads to another one. And I know a lot of us have had difficult experience. Some of you had tragic experiences. But listening to this gentleman here, I'm reminded of something a little bit more humorous. In our very first flight experience, we went to primary school in the Army Air Corps. And we flew PT-23s, which were open cockpit, tandem seats. And a friend of mine with whom I roomed went up for his very first orientation flight. The instructor took him up, and it was his habit, he'd let you take the stick, and then all of a sudden he'd turn it upside down. Well, naturally, any human being is going to grab the side of the cockpit as he sees the barns going up and the farmland going past him. This kid fell out of the airplane because the safety belt wasn't fastened. And we didn't have any training of parachute jumping or anything. He's on his way down. We're only about 1,500 feet. And I talked to him later because the instructor now is giving him a lot of four-letter words because he's not taking the controls. And he's howling at him through the little tube we had. Nothing's happening. The instructor turned around with the goggles on and is swearing at him, and there's no one in the back seat. The instructor flies back, and there's a parachute down in the farmyard there. So anyhow, I asked the kid, when did the parachute open? He said, I'm reaching for my ring, and I swear the parachute opened approximately 2 feet before my feet touched the ground. So we had humorous experiences too.
Mario.
I had a very funny experience. We had encountered a Betty, and our oil tanks got all shot up, lost all the oil, both engines freeze. You have to land or get out of the thing. We all bailed out. And our instructions had always been, when you're 10 feet off the water, unbuckle after your chute opens and you're sitting in a harness, unbuckle your chest strap, your leg straps, and just sit there. When you're 10 feet off the water, straighten your body up and you'll just go in, the chute will drift away from you. Well, when the sea is very calm, and I'm looking at it, I thought my eyesight was pretty good in those days, and I didn't know what 10 feet was, and I wasn't about to let go of the chute. So I just straightened up and hung on to the risers. And I figured when my feet touch the water, I'll let go of it. But when my feet touched the water, the breeze just kind of laid it down, and it was like a half hemisphere on the water, and I could see through the vent hole. And it's taking me right to that spit of sand over there. And gee, this is great. I don't even have to swim, Well, with that, I hear, hey, hey. And I look over, and there's a submarine sitting there. And guy says, they have 2 of them up there on the bridge in the conning tower, and he says, let go of the chute, we'll pick you up. All I could think of was, are you guys going to submerge? And they sat there and talked it over a little bit, and then they decided that the answer I was looking for was no, and that's what they told me. So I let go of the chute. Thank God that I did. That atoll I was headed for was nothing but coral reef. And had I been dragged across that by that parachute, I wouldn't be here to talk about it today. But anyway, I let go of the chute, swam over to it. The sub was right alongside of me. Swam over to it. They picked me up, got me in, down below, and as soon as I'm in the control room, I hear hatches clanging shut. They had already picked up the rest of my crew. I hear air hissing out of the ballast tanks, and this thing is going down. And I ran up to the skipper, and I screamed at him and called him every foul name you could think of. I says, you told me you weren't going to submerge. All he did was crack up laughing, and very fortunately, I didn't get in any trouble over it.
Great. Okay, Casey.
Can I tell a dog story?
A dog story? Sure.
Well,
Free country, Casey.
I'm American, too. On our way, we just finished combat training in India. We were on the way from Calcutta over the hump with our plane. It was a P-40. We had 10 days in Calcutta. I picked up this puppy, and I kept him in the hotel and fed him like crazy, and he wouldn't do anything. I mean, he wouldn't do any doo-doos. And anyway, I took him. I was going to take him over the hump, and I got him, put him in the cockpit, and flew over the hump. And the hump's about 20,000 feet flying. And all of a sudden, this guy let go. 10 days of it, he let go. And it was all this green stuff was over the instrument panel, the canopy, and everything. And you
were on instruments, right?
And besides being that I was the only American Chinese, I felt the pressure, you see, and so I land in Kunming, right? And I come up to the line, and the crew chief opens the counter. He says, "Oh shit!" and he looked at me, and he assumed I couldn't fly out. He thought it was me. The puppy had gone way in the tail, and he thought it was me that was. Well, I was just trying to tell you, that's all.
Oh dear.
Before we knock it off, we'll have a little quiet for the boys that aren't here.
Yeah. I think we've got about 10 more minutes, actually, and yeah. So Ed was saying that we should have a little quiet time for our pals who were. I can tell you that my co-pilot Bernard J. Foley finally got his his own crew, and was flying off of WWII, and some just never returned. Nobody knows. And we looked for him for about 3 days, so, and there are all kinds of, I'm sure everybody has a has a tale like that. Last summer I was sitting somewhere, and I've always felt guilty that I have never done anything like this. I mean, this shocks me that there's so many of us here. It really kind of is exciting. But I've never been to any kind of an Air Force reunion. How many of you haven't? Let's put it that way. Yeah, and it's really. But I said to myself, I wonder if I can name my crew, and it's. I mean, there are only 5 in my crew, so it should be fairly easy. And by gosh, I did. I could name every one of them: Quentin Chittenden, Leroy Teal, Bernard J. Foley, Quentin Strickland. I can't think of his first name. Well, they're all over. Foley came from Memphis, Tennessee, and Leroy Teal came from Portland, Oregon. And but I was interesting that I could remember.
Out of 10 of our crew, there were only 4 of us left: the pilot and nose gunner, and I was in the ball, and the radio operator. I have seen most of them through life, but we got separated when we came back from overseas, and one went this way, one went that way. So it was about 30, 40 years later, my son in North Haven gets a call, and the fellow says, "You Jim McCrossan?" And my son said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Would you be in Italy?" And he says, "No, I don't think so. I think you need my father." And it was my pilot. And he found my name in the phone book. He was visiting out here in West Hampton. So since then, we have gotten together Christmas time. We write cards and things. But over the years, we lost our navigator in Italy. He was shot down with another crew. We lost our bombardier who went to pilot's training in Korea. And our co-pilot, who was a career man in the he died. And then we just lost one of the engineers. Well, 2 of the engineers are gone. But we went over as a crew. We trained out in California.